This afternoon, our final segments of the day are going to be what we've been referring to as the lightning round of talks by museum colleagues to talk about this reinstallation project in a completely different way than we have been all day and yesterday as well. So I'm really, really excited to bring my wonderful, wonderful colleagues together and who've agreed to do this. Some of them are very familiar with this format of speaking to audiences, staring at them, and other ones aren't. So be kind, enjoy, have lots of questions because they're wonderful and they're here to share the incredible practice that they bring. What I'm going to do first is introduce very quickly. I'm going to read off 5 bios in a row, and then each person is going to come up, introduce themselves very briefly, say your name, and then give their 10-minute talk, followed by the next. We're going to do 5 right in a row, okay? And I'm going to go fast. This is me talking fast. First, we're going to have Julia Olson. You've met her already. She's a PhD candidate in Hebrew Bible and Cognate Studies at HUC, and is here as one of our Mellon Curatorial Research Fellows. She's excavated in Israel, and her research focuses on the use of rhetoric in ancient history writing with an emphasis on Akkadian annals and biblical historiography. Next, we're going to have Kelly Rechtenwald, who's our Associate Objects Conservator at the museum. In her role, she cares for all 3-dimensional works of art in the collection. She has over 10 years' experience in the field of conservation and holds the designation of Professional Associate from the American Institute of Conservation. Rechtenwald also holds a BA in Anthropology and in Chemistry, and an MA and MSc in Objects Conservation from UCL. Third, we're going to have Sarah Wenner. She's a PhD candidate in classical archaeology at UC and is another one of the Mellon Curatorial Research Fellows here at the museum. She's worked at numerous sites in Jordan, as well as in Sardinia, Pompeii, and Monticello. Her current research explores the use of recycled material in urban construction practices under the Roman Empire. Next, we've got Tori Karlev, who is a design manager at the Art Museum, where she leads a small team of designers to create graphics for exhibitions, wayfinding, and publications. She looks at design problems with a holistic approach to unify visitor with artwork and environment. She holds a BS from UC, the College of Design, Architecture, Art, and Planning. Finally, we have Kim Flora, who's our head of installation here at the museum, where she leads preparators and carpenters, overseeing all campus art movements, installations, and exhibition build-outs. She works collaboratively with architects, designers, riggers, and contractors to budget, plan, schedule, and execute installations while meeting the interpretive, curatorial, and conservation needs of each project. I say that and I have to smile. Because she does have to meet our needs. That is true. I apologize for having so many needs. But I digress. Ms. Flora has led the efforts to integrate smart lighting controls and LED technology into gallery spaces, improving operational and energy efficiency throughout the campus. She's a graduate of the Art Academy of Cincinnati, where she focused on painting and art history. So please take it away, Julia.
Hello. As Ainsley said, I'm Julia. Okay. A full understanding of an object in a museum's collection is not achieved once the accession process is completed. Objects accumulate stories, identities, and sometimes their own mythology after museum arrival. Often, an excavation post-excavation must occur in order to craft a deeper narrative about the object. It is from the files, the conservation notes, and the wider world of scholarship that this story is told. This brief study utilizes those 3 elements to establish a timeline of interpretation for these select pieces. The 2 objects discussed here have been chosen because they've been previously flagged as questionable by internal or external reviews, and a deeper investigation was needed in order to better understand them. In order to situate these pieces, a larger framework of Sasanian metalwork characteristics had to be established. Using the scholarship of Sasanian specialists, primarily that of Dr. Prue Harper, we established dating categories to which we could roughly assign pieces based on the information gleaned from the files. Central Sasanian objects must date between 226 and 651 CE and come from Iran, Iraq up to the Euphrates, as well as parts of Armenia and Georgia. A late Sasanian or provincial piece dates outside of the central Sasanian dating period or is manufactured outside of the boundaries listed above. Given that so many pieces of Sasanian art do not come from legitimate excavations, locating them within this dating scheme is rather difficult. Possible indicators of late or provincial manufacture are kings with unrecognizable crowns, traditional Sasanian motifs appearing on non-traditional objects, or alterations of those motifs to something outside the central Sasanian repertoire. A modern piece will show evidence of recent production or forced aging, such as artificial patina. Given the nuance of the previous category, it may be very easy to confuse a modern piece with a late or provincial piece. Real differentiation between these two latter categories will ultimately only be determined by means of more rigorous testing. Methods of manufacture are also useful in categorizing these objects. Data used for this study comes from the work of Dr. Peter Myers. Central Sasanian pieces are either cast or hammered. Hammering is the most common form of production, with pieces often presenting visible tool marks. Objects other than plates, such as ewers, are typically cast. The third category of manufacture will have the most bearing on our analysis today. The double shell technique utilizes two shells, one of undecorated hammered silver, and the other a decorated shell, which is attached by soldering or hammering the ridges of one shell over another. This method is never used in central Sasanian repertoire, not at all. So this means that should any CAM object under review present this method of manufacture, we can rule them out of the central Sasanian category and narrow down the identification to either late provincial or modern. The last bit of data we'll gather from the world of scholarship is that of metal testing. A 1979 study by Hughes and Hall indicated that most central Sasanian pieces present a level of silver above 94%. Dr. Peter Myers also conducted an expansive study of Sasanian metal in which he utilized thermal neutron activation. The results indicate that central Sasanian pieces contain primarily silver, copper, and gold. A high percentage of another element, such as lead, zinc, or arsenic, would indicate provincial manufacture, as it did not come from a native silver mine, or modern manufacture, as the silver would be tempered with these elements to make production perhaps more cost-effective. Let us now turn to our examination. First up is 1966-1091, plate with enthronement scene. Included in the curatorial file are two business cards. One card is for an S. Dubiner of Gallery Israel. Samuel Dubiner was an antiquities dealer on Ben Yehuda Street in Tel Aviv. He worked at the Tehran Museum during the 60s, when this plate was accessioned, and sponsored excavations in northwestern Iran. The other business card is for an N. Cohen of Tehran. No information can be retrieved about this person aside from the address of his shop, which no longer exists. Though the relationship between Dubiner, Tehran, and Cohen may explain the presence of both cards in this file, there is no other information about the provenance or acquisition of the plate in the file. Just after its accession into the collection, the plate was examined by Dr. Earl Cayley, the Department of Chemistry at The Ohio State University. Dr. Cayley examined the plate as well as the ewer, the other subject of this survey. The examination was conducted with a magnifying glass. Dr. Cayley concluded there were no indications that the pieces were modern creations. The presence of pitting and corrosion under the gold was indicative that the plate was an old surface. The plate, along with other Sasanian metal objects, was examined by Peter Myers in 1976. Dr. Myers felt that this piece was of recent manufacture, pointing to the, quote, careless design and execution, corrosion, which appeared to have been caused by splashing a liquid, acid, and a green patina, which he considered to be likely to be an acetate and not characteristic of an unquestioned piece. Dr. Myers also indicates that a repair has been made to the plate, one that is not uncommon on other double-shelled objects. We can conclude from his examination of the object that Myers believes the enthronement plate to be a double-shelled object. Where does this plate fit within the larger Sasanian repertoire? Enthronement scenes on plates are relatively rare in the corpus of Sasanian metalwork, with artisans preferring the more typical horse and rider or royal hunting motif for plate decoration. Similar enthronement scenes can be found on rock reliefs and coins, But these are not contemporary with those found on plates and differ in aspects of iconography, namely in terms of the shape of the feasting throne. Other enthronement scenes that feature a banqueting couch, like the one on the cam plate, are Islamic in manufacture, and so the furniture visible in the scene does not secure us a Sasanian date for the plate. Iconographically, Central Sasanian enthronement plates feature the king sitting, facing forward, and often holding a sword between his legs. In terms of construction, Central Sasanian enthronement plates occur exclusively on circular plates with low ring feet. The cam plate has no foot. Also, the presence of dancing female figures on Central Sasanian pieces appears almost exclusively on vases and ewers. Thus, we can conclude that the plate is not Central Sasanian, but either late provincial or modern. We turn now to 1966-1091, the ewer with dancing women. This piece was accessioned at the same time as the enthronement plate, and like the plate, was also examined by Dr. Earl Cayley. Of the ewer, he saw, quote, nothing to indicate forgery. The only possible restoration is the gold. Cayley also notes the patina, which he considers genuine, and indicates that he sees, quote, no evidence of forgery or modern manufacture. Finally, he notes that the handle is probably, quote, solid cast with the vessel, with no signs of seam or solder. The cam ewer has been the subject of a great deal of correspondence, most of which is contained within the file. However, one key piece may be missing. A former curator, Glenn Marco, indicated in a letter that the ewer and several others like it in our collection and elsewhere were identified as forgeries by, quote, several experts in Sasanian metalwork. Marco cites the primary reason for this as the double shell technique. While Marco may be citing the 1976 Myers visit here, this does not explain the reference to several experts. This is the only reference to this and other pieces in the collection being deemed as forgeries by several scholars. Further correspondence or records may still be found. In April of 2016, drilling samples were taken from the ewer. 7 readings were taken and tested for their metal composition. The results indicate the presence of at least 3 different alloys. While most of these alloys are primarily silver, none of them reach the 94% level, and there is a consistent presence of lead, mercury, and copper in each of the alloys. In a small annotation in the ewer file, we find the name of our enigmatic Cohen, the antiquities dealer from Tehran. We can conclude that the ewer and the plate were likely purchased from Cohen, perhaps by way of Dubiner, at the same time and accessioned into the collection in 1966. So, what can we draw from all of this? What can these disparate documents, informed by the robust world of Sasanian scholarship, tell us about these 2 objects in our collection? The repeated heart motif in the handle of the ewer is not found in any other handle type from any ewer examined for the purpose of this study. The same repeated heart-shaped motif can be found forming a border around the enthronement scene on the plate. Such a border is also not found on enthronement plates from any period that I was able to discover, Central, Sasanian, or otherwise. The only places the repeated heart motif occurs, as far as this analysis was able to determine, is the ewer and the plate at the Cincinnati Art Museum. Their arrival at the museum at the same time, the Tehran connection, the heart-shaped motif, and the lower than average silver levels in the ewer might suggest not only that the pieces are modern, but that they may have been crafted in the same workshop. Of course, further testing is needed. If we could test the plate and check its levels against those of the ewer, we could truly illuminate a possible connection between these 2 objects. This, of course, is not the end of the story. As we know, stories accumulate even after an enterprising research fellow makes her own conclusions. These are, for the moment, the tools that we have. In the future, there will be more, and another lover of Sasanian art and mystery solving will take to the files and render perhaps wildly different conclusions. However, what we know for now is that these objects have a place in a larger narrative. They are themselves homages to Sasanian art, attesting to the long-term fascination with this repertoire. They are evidence of the enduring legacy of Sasanian art and its ongoing impact on the 20th and 21st centuries. Thank you.
All right, I'm Kelly Rechtenwald. I'm going to make sure that you can hear me. Yeah? All right. Are we on this side? All right. I'm going to talk about exploring how historic records can inform the conservation process. Before starting any treatment, it's very important to know as much history as possible about an object, especially whether or not it's been treated before. Understanding the condition of an object and how it's changed over time helps us plan for its future. And I just want to mention that everything I'm going to share with you today, it is not every single thing that has influenced the decision-making for treating this object. It's only what I have time to share with you in 10 minutes. So just know that there's so much more that goes into a decision-making process for an object, and these are just the most exciting and important things that I found. Okay. Sorry, it shows both slides up here, so I'm a little confused. What we know about the object, jumping right in. We know that it entered the collection in 1952 and that it was collected through a well-known dealer. These are things that come up right away. I don't have to search for them. They're in our digital database. So there's no searching that I need to do for this information. I can tell through visual analysis that the head and facial features show signs of previous treatment. The surface is shiny and translucent, unlike stone, and small pieces of non-stone material have started chipping away from the surface, indicating that a foreign material is present. There's also a large crack that splits the piece into two large fragments, but the stone itself is in stable condition. Unfortunately, there is no conservation file for this object, which I can say is not unusual for objects in the collection. But what I know from a file not existing is that it was probably treated before it came into the collection, just because documentation is one of the core tenets of modern conservation ethics. So if this was treated in the last 30 or 50 years, we would expect to see a record of treatment here at the museum. So I start with further visual analysis. And this is what the object looks like under ultraviolet light. So we can see the glowing that you see there is the foreign material that's present. It is extensive and it is interventive. It really shows that the entire head, the eye, the nose, much of the facial features have been altered in some way. Additionally, the background of the stone has been altered in these areas. And here you can tell, I can see these scattered drips of what looks like wax. And I can identify this foreign material as some type of wax, and that's a material that's commonly used in conservation. And this wax does show signs of deterioration as it's starting to chip away. So now at this point, I'm certain the object has been treated before and that is extensive and interventive, what has occurred to it. So in planning my 2021 treatment, my goal is to address the deteriorating wax. I don't want pieces of wax falling off in the gallery. I also want to improve the visual appearance of the piece, getting rid of that shiny, waxy appearance and restoring that stone surface. And this piece is also going to be in a permanent installation gallery. So the chance for treatment is now. If we miss it, it's gone and it will stay in this condition and probably worsen. Before I can start, I need to answer some questions, which are up here. When and who applied the wax? The age of the repair is important so that I can understand how long it's going to last into the future. Was it done by a conservator? Was it done by a studio before it entered the collection to appear more whole for sale? And just noting that on the earlier slide where I showed the date that it entered the collection and the dealer who we got it from, there's a lot of underlying information there that I get just from those two pieces of information, such as what I know about that dealer, what other objects we have in the collection, what state those objects are in, what collecting practices were in 1952, and how that affects the condition of the object. So all of this is giving me more and more information. I also want to know why it's applied, of course. Under the wax, what is there? It could be a complete loss of the stone. We could have absolutely nothing there, and removing the wax could expose extensive and irreversible loss. On the other hand, in my experience, a lot of times, very early conservation treatments go overboard in covering a very small loss with an extensive amount of material. So it's possible that by removing the wax, we're going to expose a more authentic surface. So it's definitely something to weigh up. Should it be removed? Areas of wax, areas that have been treated with wax on objects are not usually retreatable. Wax acts as a resist. If you're an artist, you may know this. Wax is a really common resist material. So if I find that there's a complete loss of, say, the head, the face, the eyes, I'm going to need to add something else to replace the wax. And if I'm unable to do that, we're going to end up with something that doesn't look like this object. So it's definitely something to consider. So now we start with the evidence. Enter my first clue that I found. This is one letter from a collection of letters from 1955. It's between the director at our museum at the time and a chairman at Dartmouth College. And one of the letters, dated May 3rd, 1955, reads these very two important sentences: that restoration was confined to those areas where the main contours were indicated and the surface showed signs of erosion. The material our conservation department used was a combination of white wax and crushed Colorado alabaster. I will tell you, finding something like this in a letter, a correspondence, is highly unusual. I once went through our archive searching through 5 different years trying to find information about a treatment, and there was nothing there. So this letter is very detailed, tells me exactly what materials were used, and that it was done by the conservation department. So this is like gold for me, finding this letter, even though it's a very unusual source for this information. We also have this post-1955 treatment photo, which this tells me how the wax treatment has deteriorated over time. So I can see what it looked like freshly finished by their conservator and what it looks like now. So I also know that the areas covered by wax are not completely lost. The edges, it says, appear to exist, and the damage is called erosion. So I get an idea of what that damage might look like. Also, we now know that the treatment is over 70 years old, which is important for how long it's going to last. My next 2 important clues are this book published in 1978, which lists our conservator who carried out the treatment, very likely at least. He worked there from 1950 to 1968, W. Harry Gothard, and he's mainly listed as the paintings conservator who worked on objects also. In 1955, there wasn't too much distinguishing between the different types of conservation. So we can pretty much point to this guy as the one who treated the object. It's important to know that it's a conservator who treated it and not just someone off the streets, someone who was trained, who had knowledge of the object and what they were doing. And the other thing, obviously, this photo that shows before it was treated, this is another gold mine hit for me. It shows exactly what's lost and what I can expect to find when I take the wax off of the object. So in summary, it was Gothard in the Camp Conservation Lab with the wax. If we were playing Clue, we are winning. So there we go. We've got all of our information. So now I start the treatment. And I'd like to say that it went off without a hitch, but of course, with conservation treatments, there are always surprises. So in this photo, you can see there's this surprise of these holes that have been drilled. The wax was difficult to remove, took a long time, was done in a dark room under ultraviolet light. And during that process, I uncovered these 8 holes. They're drilled holes that go all the way through the object, located in some really inconvenient places, like the corner of the eye. I know that these are problems now, and they were also filled with plaster, in addition to being surface covered with this wax. I did not have time to research what these holes were, or if they've been found in other similar objects, but that is something that I've noted and that someone else can research in the future. We also see clearly now that the head is part of 4 separate fragments that have been put together to create this one bigger fragment. And if we look back to the 1955 treatment photo, we can see that there's no evidence of these holes there. So this indicates that there was a treatment prior to it coming into the museum. And during that treatment, also, the 4 fragments of the head would have been put back together. So I know now that I'm at least the 3rd person who's applying a treatment that alters this object in some way. So you may have noticed from those photos that the eyebrow was lacking in all of them. There was severe erosion to the eyebrow. It was lost. Ainsley and I worked together to decide that we should reconstruct that eyebrow. Julia was kind enough to send me many, many examples of eyebrows of similar pieces. So looking through all of those, I chose a few that I thought were most stylistically like ours from other features, and we sort of worked to get our eyebrow from those. We also had the outline of the eyebrow that was established, as was mentioned in the 1955 letter. So in the end, here we are. We can see that there's actually very little loss to this object. The amount of wax that was applied was just incredible, and it was very laborious taking it off. But now we expose this original stone surface. The erosion is actually quite interesting to the history of the object. All of that can be seen now. We think it looks a little more authentic. The eyebrow that I've created is easily reversible, so in the future, if someone decides that that eyebrow is way too much material, as opinions on conservation on things like that change all the time, they can easily remove that or even reshape it to something that they feel is more appropriate. So thank you for listening.
Hello, my name is Sarah. Oh, it is. You do see them all. Okay. All right. My name is Sarah Wenner, and I'm here to talk about putting together the digital fly-through for the gallery. Though primarily a literary scholar, Stephen Greenblatt noted in the 1991 publication Exhibiting Culture that objects displayed in museums had the capacity to conjure resonance or wonder. Resonance, Greenblatt described as, quote, the power of the displayed object to reach out beyond its formal boundaries to a larger world, to evoke in the viewer the complex, dynamic cultural forces from which it has emerged and for which it may be taken by a viewer to stand. The concept of wonder is a bit more abstract. According to Greenblatt, it is the power of an object to, quote, stop the viewer in their tracks, to convey an arresting sense of uniqueness, to invoke an exalted attention. These idealized distinctions allow museum professionals to isolate and carefully curate various aspects of a visitor's experience when standing in the gallery. But more importantly, when a space is designed with the intention to evoke feelings both of resonance and wonder, when the aesthetics of objects are as enthralling as the narratives they share, the viewer may find that their experience only continues to grow even after they leave the museum. The shrine from the Nabataean Temple of Khirbet-et-Tenour is one of these objects that must evoke both feelings. It must trigger wonder while it also resonates deeply with those standing before it. If I do say myself, there can be no doubt that the shrine induces a feeling of wonder. The intricately and delicately carved blocks, standing much as they would have in antiquity, the floral and vegetative details that appear as lush as they are stylized, the captivating gaze of the zodiac goddess, the crisp, articulate frame introducing just a touch of the clean, modern aesthetic. I have been told I have to stay to 10 minutes, so I'm going to stop my description there. The means to make the Nabataeans resonate with visitors are found numerous places in the gallery, including text panels, labels, other artifacts, and the digital interactive screen by the gallery's entrance, which is really quite incredible. We aren't talking about it in the symposium today, but I encourage you all to go play around with that screen a bit. But these present cultural and artistic information about the Nabataeans, their methods of communicating power, their varying religious and artistic practices, and their continued legacies. But for the shrine itself, perhaps nothing offers the opportunity for resonance better than the reimagination of the temple as seen through the fly-through. With the rest of my time, I want to briefly explore some of the many considerations that went into the creation of that 5-minute video. In the spring of 2019, the Cincinnati Art Museum partnered with Unified Field, an interactive design studio in New York, to build both the interactive screen and the digital fly-through of the Conservator temple. The temple fly-through would include a 360-degree view of the elements and objects on display in the gallery, as well as one that was not, the horned capital, the very first cam object that appears in the video and my personal favorite. It would begin with an aerial view of the temple to showcase the landscape in which it stood and to geographically contextualize the site. As the view progressed through the temple, through the entrance, into the inner temenos, and then to the altar platform, the cam objects would be called out. After a tour through the temple, the view would pull out again and provide an aerial perspective. The video that can be seen in the gallery today has that same basic framework. While the video itself is interpretive, it is not an invention. Instead, it is a model built on decades of research and archaeological and archival work. The building's shape and size, its layout, its appearance were reconstructed using Nelson Glick's and Judith Mackenzie's scholarship, Glick's site photos and excavation record, Mackenzie's drawings and those she commissioned from Sheila Gibson, and the architectural plans of all parts of the temple. Just a handful of these documents that went into the creation of the temple can be seen here in this very chaotic slide. Because the video was so deeply researched, it was incredibly important to us as a team that the video not appear too much like a video game, lest it appear fictional or fantastical. Based on the research of Glick, Mackenzie, and others, the museum team had to choose where museum objects would be represented in the digital temple. We knew with relative certainty, relative being the key word there, where the vast majority of the Conservator sculptures and artifacts should be placed, but we're less sure where a handful of the sculptures and elements lived in antiquity. This was especially true of a number of the decorative elements, some of which had never been on display. As is perhaps only fitting for a technologically sophisticated project such as this one, our earliest reconstructions of the inner temenos and the altar lived entirely on paper, with objects cut and pasted so that they could move about. Based on the scholarship and the mock-ups we provided, Unified Field began to map camera movements, take 360-degree photography. There was an article about this process, if you're curious, in one of the members' magazines from spring of 2021, and to build the 3D renderings. Unified Field then shared previews of this work. Just FYI, I'm about to show a quick video of the first deliverable we got from Unified Field. It's a little bit dizzying. It's about 20 seconds long, so look away if you might get a little bit nauseous. Okay. These deliverables raise new questions. For instance, what were the size of the stones of the courtyard floor, or the building's outer walls? What should the structure's door look like? How should the floors and roofs appear so that the visitor knew they existed but could also see what was enclosed, like the dining benches? How should the missing sculptures be rendered? What should the vegetation surrounding the structure be like? Some of these questions had definite answers. There are photos of the courtyard and the exterior walls from Glick's original excavation that clearly show the stone size and its positioning. Alternatively, other questions had no immediate answers. The door was theorized to have been made from wood, as Mackenzie's final publication noted burning patterns near the building's entrance. The door likely burned during the earthquake of 363 CE that triggered the building's collapse. Ultimately, we decided against recreating the door, both because of our continued uncertainty as to its nature and because it would add more time to already a bit lengthy of a video. Unified Field and the Cincinnati Art Museum exchanged videos and feedback repeatedly throughout this process, resulting in a number of edits of various sizes. For instance, it was really important to us that the temple appear unweathered in the video and accurately reflect the color and the appearance of the building stones. After all, if the fly-through reimagined how it would have looked in antiquity, it should not be seen as cracked, crumbling, burned, or in ruins. Such a version would be problematic and over-romanticizing of the past. So many 18th and 19th century depictions of the classical period world showcase crumbling but still beautiful marvels covered with vines set in a landscape of idyllic daily life. These depictions, while certainly lovely, curate a bit of a simplistic and idealized interpretation and imply a connection with the ancient world, which one author has described as, quote, half satire and half dream. At times, ruins, both real and embedded in art, serve to present various colonial powers of the past centuries as the successors of the Roman Empire. Regarding the artworks depicting quote-unquote ruins in the Middle East, this image may be even more problematic, as oftentimes the colors appear overly bleached. Obviously, this is not true in all instances, but here, perhaps it is to make the ruins look a bit more like the Greco-Roman Europe. Indigenous residents feature as little more than decoration, their presence almost conversely implying the emptiness of the area, thus leaving it open to the Western visitor. We not only wanted to sidestep this trope, but to make moves actively towards breaking it. As a result, we spent much time working on the structure's color and temple, attempting to have the model reflect reality. This was difficult because the stones did not weather the same in the archaeological record, and they do feature some natural variation that's really hard to recreate in a digital screen. Additionally, we could not recreate the paint that decorated the stones because we had too little evidence for how it looked as a result of the time the stones spent on the surface, as well as 20th century conservation and cleaning treatments. There are numerous other considerations that the design process triggered, most of which cannot be recounted here, but I do wish to note one additional concern: how green to make the landscape. Kerbedet-Tenur is located in an arid region. During the summer months, the landscape may appear brown, but this disguises the region's potential. Farming does occur in the region today, and verdant pockets are visible from the top of Jebel Tenur around the wadis and springs. I know because Ainsley and I trekked up there in spring of 2020, just before everything shut down. So we wanted to make certain that our video showcases some of the possible vegetation surrounding the temple, lest we imply that there was none. Perhaps I need to beg your forgiveness in advance for this line from Pierre Bourdieu, but after all, I am an academic and perhaps a bit overly fond of an eloquent but maybe slightly out of context quote. But anyway, in the introduction of his book, Distinction, a social critique of the judgment of taste, Bourdieu wrote, "A work of art has meaning and interest only for someone who possesses the cultural competence, that is, the code into which it is encoded. A beholder who lacks the specific code feels lost in chaos of sounds and rhythms, colors and lines, without rhyme or reason." As stewards of the largest collection of Nabataean sculpture outside of Jordan, it is our obligation. Is it going? Nope. Well, you can visit the oh, there we go. As stewards of the largest collection of Nabataean sculpture outside of Jordan, it is our obligation to ensure that our visitors possess the proper code to experience our gallery, not only so they can escape the cacophony of seemingly disjointed information striking their senses, but so that they can truly appreciate the art before them. The digital fly-through of the temple is just one element of our attempt to help visitors find such appreciation in our gallery. But perhaps because of it, they can better appreciate the physical labor necessary for Tenur's creation, the journey required for the pilgrim to visit, the monumentality, the physicality, the sincerity of an individual's experience there, and the temple's ongoing life after its destruction, in addition to the exalted attention triggered by the arresting aesthetics. And perhaps, more importantly, the visitor might experience this wonder independent of some of the possible misunderstandings and biases that they didn't know that they carried. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Tori Karlev. With each project, as a designer, you must always pause and ask yourself, how does graphic design play a role here? Throughout my experience as the design manager for the museum, the answer always seems to boil down to unity. Whether it be physical space and art, publication and exhibition, or something I haven't even been made aware of yet. In the case of the Ancient Middle East Gallery, there are lots of opportunity to unify the visitor with what they were experiencing. Labels, of course, always come to mind first, as they physically unite the visitor to the art they are viewing with answers about the piece in front of them. In this gallery, we had the challenge of bringing this information to the visitor in a compact space. The curator and exhibition designer had envisioned these dynamic layouts with lots of objects in small cases. While beautiful, it does not allow for ample space for descriptive copy. So we took a step back and asked, how can we make it clear for the visitors to know what information goes with what objects? How do we fit all this content in these small cases? And from there, baby tombstones were born. When going into a new design project, it helps to acknowledge the old, the standard, but never let that limit you. Take what you know is true and see where those restrictions can be broken and/or expanded upon. Throughout the gallery space, you'll see where graphics play a bigger role than just labels. The graphics begin to tell a story that cannot be accomplished on their own. We were able to provide additional colors to the gallery that just wasn't possible with paint. The map of the region brings the rich, lush colors from the Shazia windows down to the regular viewing plane. The line drawing that accompanied the winged genie provides context that wouldn't be able to be relayed as easily in text. In this example, we had limitations we had to work within provided by the physical space. So again, we had to unite the curators and exhibition designers' visions with what the construction company delivered as a physical space. The representational drawing we received of the genie was far too tall for the space when united with the object. Fine-tuning had to be made to shorten the figure proportionately without throwing off scale with the art object. Together with the preparator, we used printed mock-ups to ensure the end graphic would perfectly align with the art object, giving you the overall impression the artwork would have had in its original installation. Line drawings were provided in many places throughout the gallery, one not more noticeable than the shrine. We first started talks about the graphics surrounding the shrine almost 2 years ago. This was a different opportunity for us. Normally, the things my team designs serve as a supporting role, never the first thing you notice when you walk into the room with artwork. The curator had a different vision. She sent amazing inspiration that was literally artwork itself. Nothing like a curator sending you artwork to emulate and not being an artist myself. I may or may not have been intimidated. And with all the projects that seem overwhelming, you start little by little. How do we take the curator's vision and unite it with the visitor's experience here? First things first, let's open that file we have. The ornamental detail in Judith Mackenzie's original drawing was beautiful, and it did a fine job at smaller scale. But it didn't quite hold up as we got into the detail. This was gonna be huge, and when things are large, you notice the little nuances. After trying our best to make the file work for quite some time, my team and I realized we'd need to start from scratch. And next, I did what any great manager does: delegate the duties you cannot do best. My cohort here, Katie Crothers, is a whiz at illustrator and dove into this project. She went in and redrew all of the individual pieces. Yes, every single one of those grapes. At this point, we needed to pull in our fabricator. Working with a great, knowledgeable fabricator is key for all the design we implement at the museum. They are more than just a fabricator, but a partner. Their expertise and knowledge help us to accomplish the out-there ideas my team comes up with. Their passion for their work the work they produce ignites our excitement here about doing new and difficult applications. So I knew they'd be giddy at the chance to help us bring us this ancient temple to life. And we needed their input before we got too far in the design process. We can't, as designers, travel too far down a path if it's not physically feasible or financially affordable. Again, we're uniting grand ideas with physical installations. Over a call, I proposed our idea: a water jet cut steel design that'd be mounted a couple inches off the wall with integrated artwork. Simple, right? They were excited. I showed inspiration images, our drawings in the space. They had great ideas for production and couldn't wait to get started. But then, of course, budget had to be discussed. With pandemic prices of steel, it just was not going to be able to be produced as desired. The hard part of my job, delivering bad news and not making it sound as bad. You know, crushing the hopes and dreams of the curator while trying to put a positive spin on it. But out of all struggles and restrictions, creativity is born. Together with our fabricator, we talked to other materials. They got excited again, we got excited again, and the new path forward was forged, and they wanted to do samples. That's where we paused and revisited the drawing, taking into mind that we were going to need to have these produced in 3D. You could not have too many floating pieces, not too many details, but just enough details. We had to think of the shrine in panels that could be put up as one piece. So we had to make little connections that weren't necessarily there, taking time to make them subtle enough that they would not throw off the context, but strong enough to make the physical connection the material demanded. Since we were starting to take some liberties, we had to frequently pull back and consult our curatorial team. We would ask questions like, can we change this? Learning what these ancient shapes were representing was helpful. I think the most interesting thing for me, I assumed these were arrows. I wanted to know how we might draw them better. The original document had the lines segmented, but upon consultation with Sarah, we learned these are in fact ancient lightning bolts. Who knew? She was able to supply us with historic reference images, and our drawing improved. How far could we simplify this for our fabricator, but still have the reference be clear and make the stones feel at home? As we were being pushed to simplify, consultation needed to happen again. The process here went old school. We gathered large printouts of the areas of concern and used whiteout. As we discussed with our curatorial team what we wanted to remove, we could show in a real way how the removal of one line could change the appearance. This in-person physical collaboration was needed for the project, but also, I think, for us as individuals. We were working on this part in the height of pandemic isolation, and this togetherness renewed my inspiration and drive for the project. Through this, a final drawing was had, so back came in our fabricator and their samples. They had great ideas for how to bring this back into our budget. Together with our curatorial team, conservation team, and art handlers, we reviewed the samples with the artwork. Each sample was considered for material, heft, and general appearance. How do these materials interact with the stones? Can we keep enough clear space for the stone to be installed afterwards? Does the material propose any conservation concerns? How do we light the graphic? Will perspective become difficult? And of course, does it look cool? Now, the hard part comes. Can we still convey the appearance of metal without the cost? Can we get back to the original idea and inspiration? It was important to me to find the solution that still delivered what I promised a year before. Can I unify the curatorial vision for the gallery and physical limitations set by the fabricator? We settled on laser cut acrylic that would be painted to match the finishes of the gallery. It surprisingly still looked like small metal channels, but for a fraction of the cost. So from there, our concept had been solidified. Back to the details we went. Here came the large collaboration with our main art preparator for the shrine. We printed full-scale mock-ups and sections of the graphics for him to actually install the stones on top of. He helped us figure out if lines needed to shift one way or the other, where gaps in the design needed to be planned, and to have ample space for shelf brackets and artwork. Once we had the smaller vignettes figured out, then we went big. We needed walls tall enough to get the stones installed all in situ. The entire shrine from about 36 inches and up was produced on paper for him to integrate the stones. Perspective was brought into the conversation here. How did we want the stones to look in the graphic? Was one magical spot realistic where all the pieces and vision came together? Or should we finesse each stone so it looks the best it can from the most possible vantage points? We chose the latter, still keeping in mind the overall picture. As we got all the stones placed in just the right spots, back came in conservation. We had to take into account what Kelly was comfortable with as far as how close the graphic could get to the stone. Again, markups were made to the paper and translated to the file. At last, we were ready to release to our fabricator. Pictures were exchanged, questions were asked, but it all came down to install day. Was this going to work? We had to get the shrine graphic installed before artwork was in. Well, before, frankly, the gallery was even fully finished in its renovation. As always with install days, I'm nervous. I just know something's going to go wrong. It's inevitable. I just want to know what it is so I can solve it. We had a few hiccups throughout. Small changes needed to be made, a run down to the carpentry shop for a trim or two. But it was up, and we could tell it was going to be impressive. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Kim Flora, head of installation. From storage to daylight, mounting ancient temple fragments in a 21st century space. As you have seen and heard from many of my colleagues, the centerpiece of our ancient Middle East gallery is the temple shrine from Khirbet et Tenor. This afternoon, I will speak to you about this installation organized in 4 parts. I will review with you how previous installations informed our execution, share details about the mount making process and decisions that occurred behind the scenes, strategies for executing the installation in our new gallery space, and finally, finishing details that went into the final display you see upstairs. The first thing we did in the installation department was to look for guidance from the staff that came before us. We referred to the museum's curatorial and installation archives to better understand the nuances of this object and how this installation was executed in the past to start discussions about how we were going to approach this installation today. From the research, we found previous iterations of this installation at our museum in 1975, 1992, and the early 2000s. What you can see in these photographs are art handlers collaborating with professional stonemasons to erect the shrine columns using mortar. Because mortar needs to be physically chipped away during the removal process upon deinstallation, it was decided that for the longevity and care of this object, that approach was no longer an acceptable way to assemble this artwork. With that in mind, indeed, how are we going to tackle this challenge? We decided collectively that we needed to create a mounting system for the piece that was safe, stable, reversible, and integrated both physically and conceptually into the architecture of our new gallery. Yes, I know, but exactly how are we going to do this? Well, through collaboration, we gathered all the project stakeholders to contribute to its success, tapping each person with their respective roles, ensuring a safe, smart, and accessible interpretation and presentation of this piece. The key players in this collaboration include the object's conservator and chief conservator, our curatorial team, archaeology experts, architect, exhibition designer, graphic designer, structural engineer, mount maker, and the fabricator. Moving on, bringing these objects back into the daylight from the confines of museum storage allowed our conservator to examine and treat them as necessary, and the designer and mount maker to get a look at everything. Here you can see the stones staged in our behind-the-scenes workroom as we get an understanding of the many pieces to our puzzle. Like any large project, you break it down into digestible chunks. First off, it was necessary to ensure we had an accurate weight for each stone and not a guesstimate, so we weighed them. The combined total weight of the 24 stones was nearly 5,000 pounds. Individual weights are labeled on this diagram. Those weights were communicated to the structural engineer, who was tasked with helping us develop a system to support the upper portion of the shrine. As an alternative to the mortar described earlier, we employed a two-part epoxy product typical in museum mount making to create individual cushions between each pair of stones. These cushion mounts fit snug to the top of each stone and created a seat for the next stone in the column to be safely received. While we at the museum had a strategy to erect the side columns of the piece, it was time to circle back to the structural engineer to get his expertise in mounting the upper portion. To do that, he presented us with this design for a steel framework that could be inserted into a cavity in the gallery wall, provide individual support to each of the stones using custom-made steel shelves mounted to a reinforced steel plate. Here's a look at the production of some of those shelves. After several rounds of conversations with the steel fabricator to get the final build just right, the mount was produced, built at their shop, inspected by us, taken apart, delivered to the museum, and rebuilt in our staging area. We utilized the assistance of a gantry crane and chain hoist to assemble the mount and lift the heavy stones. The gantry crane, consisting of two triangular legs and an I-beam, was able to straddle the steel mount in our work area, which was particularly helpful as we were testing and completing this work. Here are a few images that illustrate the various states of the shrine as we work through the mounting challenges. These images show half of the arch being supported to determine its placement in relationship to the columns. In addition to the stones that make up the arch itself, there was also the display of the architectural fragments from the temple complex surround that needed to be accounted for and mounted in context of the amazing graphic our design team generated for this project. These stones were approached in a similar manner with custom-made shelves and epoxy sculpt. In addition to the shelves supporting the bottom of the stones, each piece had a steel tether that tied these objects back to the wall to ensure their stability. Following the execution of this mounting work, test fitting, retesting, in addition to countless material and construction delays in the gallery upstairs, global supply chain issues, and the pandemic, the moment had come to disassemble the stones in our workroom, unscrew the bolts keeping all this steel together, and travel our mount upstairs to the gallery. It was go time. This image shows the steel frame fits snug inside the wall cavity, the graphic application discussed earlier, and two preparators on a lift mounting shelves to receive the architectural fragments. Zooming further out, you can see the state of the gallery. At this point, which consists of the art glass windows, cavities to receive casework, and this wall awaiting its main feature. We then traveled the stones and their steel mounts to the gallery. While the architectural fragments in the temple surround were of moderate weight and could be handled by hand, the stones created in the columns and the temple arch itself were much heavier and required special equipment. Introducing the spider crane. While in our staging area, we were able to straddle the mount with a gantry to build the arch. In the finished gallery space, we were not able to do so because the mount was integrated into the architecture of the building. That got us thinking about what type of material handling equipment was going to suit our needs for this project. A forklift proved too large for our narrow doorways, and frankly, not the safest way to move these stones. That's when we found the spider crane. It was compact enough to navigate through the museum's tight spaces, and when it unfolded with its outriggers in position, it provided the counterbalance and reach to install our stones. In this image, you can see a preparator handling a column stone with the aid of the crane. Here's a fun bird's eye view from atop the lintel stone being rigged into place. Here are some additional views of the installation. After several weeks of building the shrine a few steps forward, a few steps back to get things just right, we finally had all the stones in their proper location. Next came finishing the display. Stones were wrapped in plastic for their protection as carpentry preparators and painting staff worked to delicately trim out and fill any distracting gaps in the display and touch up the paint. Once the shrine was appropriately finished, it was time to incorporate the temple deities. Here you can see our curator assessing the display with the male deity in place. That was followed by the mounting and placement of the female deity's foot and fragments of a lion. After years of studying, measuring, planning, and consulting, finally the execution of our project was complete. I hope you enjoyed this talk today and are a little more informed about the installation work that went into the display of the temple arch you see upstairs. While I am one person sharing this information, I cannot overstate the collaborative nature of this project and am grateful to my colleagues who came together to make this ambitious project a reality. Thank you.